Ready to go? All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Ryan. I am president of the American Idea Foundation. I also used to work in government. I want to thank you all for being here for this virtual panel. I really wish we could do these in person, but that is just the way things go these days. This is a very important topic, and I'm excited about the very impressive panelists that we'll be discussing this topic with today. Opportunity zones hold the promise of being one of the most effective anti-poverty tools the government has designed for a long time. I worked on this idea in the early 1990s when I worked for Jack Kemp. Many of us have wanted to see this come to fruition, and here it is now. However, this tool contains the risk of yet being another disappointing example of misaligned government incentives if not properly implemented. But the short-term results are really promising, if mixed. But if opportunity zones are to fulfill their long-term promise, then governments at all levels must work together with the private sector to ensure that opportunity zones are meeting their goals. And what are these goals? Well, as originally authored by one of our esteemed panelists, Congresswoman Terry Sewell, the aim is to lift entire communities out of poverty by attracting private dollars to the corners of our country that have been left behind as the American economy has surged forward. That is an audacious goal, lifting entire communities out of poverty. But as we have recently witnessed, too many of our communities have been left behind. Even prior to the coronavirus-induced recession, while certain areas boomed, too many areas have seen continual job loss and lack of opportunity. Our country is obviously weaker for not providing equal opportunity to every American. Not only does it harm individuals, but by not allowing every American to develop their God-given talents, we deprive our broader communities of the unique ways that they, and only they, can contribute to our shared economy, our shared community. While opportunity zones were a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they themselves were a bipartisan affair. Congresswoman Sewell was one of the original drivers of the legislation in the House, along with our now retired colleague, Pat Tiberi. And Senator Tim Scott worked tirelessly alongside Cory Booker and others to help bring them to fruition. And to meet the promise of the legislation that Congresswoman Sewell and others led, there are a number of very important issues to consider. First and foremost, one of the unfortunate byproducts of using reconciliation, which I was very involved in this at the time, was the fact that many of the reporting and transparency requirements were blurted out. What that basically means is the Senate rules that we had to conform to in doing tax reform prohibited non-fiscal legislation from being added to it. So as a result of that, Congresswoman Sewell has been leading on this by authoring bipartisan legislation that would improve the transparency in these projects, legislation that we had always intended on coming with it in the beginning, but couldn't because of these rules. Second, funds need to ensure that their incentives align with the goals of opportunity zones. That means putting in opportunity targets that their projects should meet, along with the private sector returns for their investors. Finally, state and local governments need to make sure that they are appropriately identifying areas where projects can really make a difference. In many ways today, the panelists are leaders in assuring that opportunity zones are meeting the promise of this great legislation. The great promise of America is that the next generation is better off than the previous generation. For too many people in too many communities, that promise seems to be breaking. Opportunity zones have the potential to restore that promise by providing private sector capital to the neighborhoods and communities that have been underserved for so long. We are seeing that success already, but our panelists today are going to do the hard work to ensure that the proper incentive structures and the promise of opportunity zones are fulfilled. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First is this awesome woman who I've got to know, I think for 10 years. You came in 2010, right, sir? Yeah, so I've known Terry for 10 years. Congresswoman Terry Sewell is in her 5th term, representing Alabama's 7th district. She's one of the first women elected to Congress from Alabama, and she's the first Black woman to ever serve in the Alabama congressional delegation. Congresswoman Sewell sits on the greatest committee in Congress, otherwise known as the House Ways and Means Committee. I'm a little partial to that. And she brings to the committee her more than 15 years of experience as a securities and public finance attorney. Currently in the 116th Congress, she is the vice chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, where she sits on 3 subcommittees: Subcommittee on Health, Trade, and Worker and Family Support. By the way, she always has, the speaker puts people on the Intelligence Committee. It's a very coveted spot. You only put the brightest people on this as a general rule. Terry Sewell is also a member of the House Select Committee on Intelligence. And she is the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Defense, Intelligence, and Warfighter Support. It's a very impressive list of responsibilities in Congress that are surpassed by very, very few people. So, Terry, we're really glad to have you with us today. I'm going to announce the rest of our panelists and then go to questions with Terry because she has some time constraints on her schedule today. Next, we'll have John Persinger. John is the current CEO of the Erie Downtown Development Corporation. He worked at McDonald, Illig, Jones, and Britton Law Firm, where he focused on business and commercial transaction. He also provided legal assistance and guidance on local government and municipal law matters, and he counseled local, national, and international clients on a variety of corporate governance and regulatory matters, such as labor and employment, anti-corruption, and export issues. Prior to earning his JD, he served in a number of government positions, including attaché to the U.S. Ambassador to Australia. He also served as executive assistant to the White House Deputy Counsel, where he assisted in the nomination and confirmation process of U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts and Associate Justice Sam Alito. We're not going to get into Supreme Court politics today, just for the record. Next, we have John Lettieri. John is president and CEO of the Economic Innovation Group. Prior to EIG, John was the vice president of public policy and government affairs for a leading business organization, AFI, as we call it in the Ways and Means Committee, the Organization for International Investment, where he led the organization's state and federal policy work on such issues as tax reform, trade, investment promotion, and manufacturing. Before joining AFI, John was director of public and government affairs for a global aerospace manufacturer. He previously served as a foreign policy aide to former U.S. Senator Chuck Hagel, who was then a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And lastly, we will have Patrick McKenna. Patrick McKenna is a partner at Catalyst Opportunity Funds with Jim Sorensen. I'm a big believer in what these guys are doing at Catalyst because they are really trying to make sure that Opportunity Funds meets its full potential. And they have done a lot of interesting things to make sure that it does that. I had the pleasure of being in Salt Lake last week, visiting with the folks at Catalyst. So because Terry's, Congresswoman Sewell, because Congresswoman Sewell's schedule is a little tight today and that she has a tough schedule, I want to get into just conversing with Terry. Terry, I know some Democrats have attempted to defund opportunity zones in appropriation bills. And each of our parties have big differences within our parties. There are people who want to work constructively to tweak legislation. There are people who want to just defund legislation. Do me a favor and just kind of walk me through what you think should be done legislatively to ensure opportunity zones meet their missions, because you are really one of the go-to people on this legislation.
Well, first, I just want to thank you, Paul, for the invitation to speak today. I want to thank the American IDEA Foundation as well as EIG for the opportunity to talk about opportunity zones. You know, as you said, prior to coming to Congress, I was actually a securities lawyer, both on Wall Street and in Birmingham, Alabama, where I was a partner. And frankly, what I did a lot of was public finance, helping cities and counties and underserved communities try to figure out how to provide better economic opportunities and economic revitalization for their communities. So I am a big believer of using everything in the toolkit, your toolbox that you have in terms of trying to figure out ways that we can hobble together some public financing with private financing that will actually inure to having better communities and revitalizing those communities. So when I got to Ways and Means and we were working on the 2017 tax bill, while there were many provisions that I didn't support, I really kind of honed in on opportunity zones because I saw the potential, like the empowerment zones of the 1980s and 90s, to have an opportunity to really affect underserved and smaller rural communities. And in fact, that's what opportunity zones have done in my district. As all of us know, opportunity zones is a tax incentive for investors to invest in communities that have been historically overlooked. I believe that this program has tremendous potential. And I think that the legislation that we need in order to tweak it would be to provide better safeguards in terms of making sure that it actually is focused and targeted on the on underserved and revitalizing those communities and making sure that those communities actually have a benefit to it. In my district alone, we've seen the revitalization of a long vacant American Life building in downtown Birmingham, which will soon offer affordable housing. Likewise, we saw the investment in Stillman College, a historically Black college in my district in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, for a teaching hotel. And perhaps what I'm most excited about is that in my hometown of Selma, Alabama, we see opportunity zones being utilized to provide renovations and rehabilitation for a beautiful hotel that is called the St. James Hotel that sits on the Alabama River right next to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We know that my little town of 19,000, while very historically known because of the voting rights and what happened to John Lewis on Bloody Sunday, it is a town of only 19,000. And to see the economic revitalization of having a hotel downtown Selma will give us an opportunity to hopefully revitalize it. But as you said, there are always opportunities to make it better. And I believe that opportunity zones present a unique opportunity for increased investment. But I also know that we also need to make sure that we have real world data that will also be able to tell us the true impact of these of the opportunity zones. So I believe that the first step to make sure that this program is working as intended is to collect the data about where these investments are going and what their impact is. That's why I've introduced bipartisan legislation with my colleague Ron Kine, as well as Mike Kelly, to develop and implement strong transparency and accountability measures. We need tools to determine the real world impact of the program and to ensure that this program is being utilized as intended. Our bill is called the Opportunity Zone Accountability and Transparency Act, HR 2593, very proud that it has bipartisan support. The reporting requirements included in the bill will provide the data necessary for legislators as well as the American people to evaluate how opportunity zones are being employed and whether they're fulfilling the mission of uplifting historically underserved communities. Our bill would require the Department of Treasury to collect data nationally and at the state level on a number of data points: the number of qualified opportunity funds, the amount of assets held, the composition of the investments by asset class, the percentage of designated communities receiving the investment, and other economic indicators such as job creation, poverty reduction, and new business starts in these designated communities. In addition, our bill would also track the types of investment, who's investing where, the type of activities being supported, whether it's multifamily residential or commercial properties or economic sectors. I believe that our bill will make sure that this investment information should be made public within the first year of enactment. And so not only will we provide that collection of this data, but we'll also make sure that there's transparency to the American people. I believe that this important type of data will enhance the opportunity zones and give us a real indication of how what the true economic impact has been on the communities where we have opportunity zones. Again, I want to thank you, Paul, for the opportunity to speak about this. And like I said, I've always been one to look at the whole comprehensive tax code and to try to find opportunities to try to help my constituents. My background is in public finance, and I do believe that opportunity zones do provide a real great opportunity for us to help underserved communities. I just want to make sure that we are actually tracking and reporting the real world impact of these opportunity zones. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Terry. Look, Terry is known for being a gifted legislator who's not afraid to reach across the aisle and just find common ground where we can find it to get things done. So I'm very thankful that you're involved at this level that you are. Let me just ask just kind of a basic political question, which is, there are a lot of people who want to see opportunity zones go away. It can be made into a partisan issue, regrettably. Aside from getting the transparency requirements, passing this, how do you think we guarantee, no matter what happens in the future politically, that opportunity zones keep their bipartisan appeal and keep the people working across the aisle to make sure that this tool is made better and continues? What's your take on that?
You know, look, I think, as I said before, I've always been a glass half filled kind of girl. And I always look at the opportunities that legislation has and how I can utilize those tools to really help my district. And I believe that that many of the efforts to implement and strengthen opportunity zones can be bipartisan, like my bill. And I believe our shared goal makes it possible that this important discussion today and the ongoing policy discussions will continue about this issue. I understand the perspectives of my colleagues who have seen substantive concerns about the program. Governors across the country took varying approaches to designating what opportunity zones were going to be utilized. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, you know, our state, our governor did take a very comprehensive view of designating opportunity zones. He made sure that at least one community in every one of the counties got an opportunity zone. That doesn't mean that there wouldn't have been changes that I would have liked to see made, but it does give me a roadmap to how the 14 counties that I represent, where I could focus my interests and also focus private investors. One of the things that my governor did that I also really liked is that we established something called Opportunity Alabama, which is a nonprofit that actually helps private investors and these opportunity funds find projects in our state. And that has really inured to the benefit of my constituents. Like I said, I represent Alabama's 7th Congressional District. It's Alabama's civil rights district. It's my home district. I grew up in this district, but it is also one of the most, the poorest and the highest unemployment district in the state of Alabama. What I know for a fact, since I've been able to live that American dream, is that people in my district deserve better opportunities and more resources. And look what's possible. I'm a living example of a testimony of what's possible for my district with those opportunities. And I believe that we see these really great projects in my district where opportunity zones are making a difference. I believe that we can strengthen it by making sure that we have the collection of the data to be able to show the true economic impact. But I can tell you in talking with a lot of the investors, both for American Life and the St. James Project, Hotel Project and the Stillman Project, so many of them are really trying to not only utilize public-private partnerships, but also to create jobs in that district, so that a lot of the subcontractors and main contractors are folks that live in the district, which is really great. And so, as I've mentioned, the reporting requirements is a critical first step, but I think we can also use opportunity zones in conjunction with other anti-poverty incentives, things like new market tax credits and low-income housing tax credit and historic tax credits. I think that the bundling of all of the tools in the toolkit is one way that we can actually ensure that opportunity zones not only survive this 10-year window, but really is a part of a more comprehensive plan to fight poverty.
I think that's exactly right. So in tax reform, when we put that together, we made sure we preserved LIHTC, which is the low income housing tax credit, while doing opportunity zones, doing impact bonds. So we sort of saw a real complement to poverty fighting efforts, getting the private sector capital deployed into these areas. And it was more than just one tool. I think opportunity zones has the greatest flexibility to bring the greatest amount of money to areas, but you can lay over on top of this a real complementary mix of incentives. I just want to ask you one more question, because I'm one of these people who I was always a bear for my schedule. I never wanted to be late for things, so I want to keep you on your schedule. I got to know your district when I spent the bulk of my career in Ways and Means Committee. I went to your district when I was a sophomore congressman with John Lewis. So I got to go to Birmingham, Montgomery, and Selma and walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. An enormously educational, great experience. But it's a lot different than Wisconsin. And that experience, along with others I had throughout my tenure in Congress, told me that it's really important to get your colleagues out of their areas and go to other areas to really get a full mosaic of what America is all about and how policies make a difference. What we were attempting to do at the American Idea Foundation, but obviously couldn't because of COVID, was to try and get members of Congress and other policymakers at state level to go to these areas, to learn about these areas, to understand the power of these incentive structures, so that we could truly, on a bipartisan basis, see how this rising tide can lift all boats, see how powerful these incentives properly applied can make a huge difference. Do you believe, and now with COVID, we couldn't do that, so we're doing other, more academic kind of projects right now, but do you believe that is something that most members of Congress would be willing to do? I mean, in my case, John Lewis asked you to come to his district, you go to his district, but so the question is, do you think members of Congress on both sides would be more than willing to, in these difficult, challenging lives and schedules that they lead, go to these areas to learn more about this? What do you think about that?
I think that that is exactly what we need to do. I think that when we have an opportunity to visit each other's districts, we can see that there's so many things that are more similar than the differences that are so often highlighted by the press and sometimes by our own parties. I think that we have to be able to put party aside, red and blue, and really look at the needs of the people. And to solve these pressing issues like poverty, I think it's really important that we go and see these areas and see the potential that lies there. This means being able to identify the needs specific to each community and leveraging the local, state, and federal resources available to really address these issues. We must build flexibility into our economic development incentives to allow capital to flow where it is greatest needed and where communities need affordable housing or healthcare infrastructure or a new grocery store or a hospital or a hotel. We must align these incentives of community and investors to achieve these goals. I'm really, like I said, really excited about the ability to layer the various incentives to help people. And I do believe by getting out of our comfort zone and visiting one another's districts, we can do that. You know, one of the things that Chairman Neal has done, I kept talking about rural healthcare and how the needs were different than some of the needs in more urban areas. And he established a bipartisan rural health task force in which I'm a co-chair along with Danny Davis, but so is Brad Winstrup, Dr. Winstrup, as well as Jody Arrington. So 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And what we're attempting to do is when we get beyond COVID-19, we will go and visit each other's districts. But in the meantime, we're holding Zoom forums where different members of our communities can come in and talk to us about what they see as the policy areas that we can work on together and what we see as solutions. And I think that that is a real head start. And I do believe that having an opportunity to get outside of Washington and to really see how people live and to meet people where they are is critically important to the success not only of opportunity zones, but all of these incentives that will look to bring public and private partnerships together on behalf of the American people.
Oh, that's awesome. That's music to my ears. And I just want to thank you really for taking the time. I know you've got a tight schedule. I'm going to bring in the other panelists in sort of a multi, not one at a time, but joint discussion. So Terry, I just want to thank you so much for giving us the time you did. I really look forward to working with you on this stuff in the future. We'll make this bipartisan. It is bipartisan. It'll continue to be bipartisan, and we will, even without legislation, work on making sure that these kinds of transparency and accountability measures are pushed into the private sector, even without legislation. But once we get this legislation passed, it will be a very, very good day for bringing people out of poverty. So again, Terry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Again, I want to thank everyone at American Ideas Foundation as well as EIG for the opportunity to talk about these very important incentives, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. So for everybody else, if you want to ask questions, I'm gonna look at the Q&A function. Don't do it in the chat function. Do your questions in the Q&A function. That's easier to operate. I've mentioned the other panelists here. I want to bring them in sort of each together, but I want to first start with John Persinger. The Erie Development Corporation has sort of been held out there as a poster child for how these are supposed to work, how good and great of a potential that opportunity zones are. So let me just ask you a couple of quick questions. Can you discuss, what was the secret to your sauce? What was the key to make you successful as you've been? And what was the methodical planning that went into your approach of getting community buy-in, some more support from the business community and from federal legislators? So, everybody talks about how great Erie is. Why is it so? Tell us that story, please.
Well, first, thank you for having me today, and thank you for highlighting Erie. Thank you to the American Idea Foundation for continuing to promote these for this webinar, but also for promoting these ideas that's helping transform Erie. And it's great to be here with some folks who have been so supportive of us in Erie, the EIG and the folks at Sorensen. So that's kind of a theme here in Erie. It's been a lot of teamwork. We are at the forefront of our development at the Erie Downtown Development Corporation, but this is years in the making. In 2016, the city of Erie had a comprehensive plan done, and Erie, like similar post-industrial cities across the Midwest and Northeast, have suffered from economic and population decline. That's left a lot of blighted, abandoned, vacant, underutilized properties, particularly in our downtown core. Now, in 2016, we also had a transition in leadership at our major employer, Erie Insurance. The new CEO came in and He rounded up some other CEOs and philanthropists, and they decided that they needed to do something about this comprehensive study that had been done for the community. They took a trip out to Cincinnati and to study the successful Cincinnati Center City Development Corporation. And they came back and they set up two entities, the Erie Downtown Development Corporation and the Erie Downtown Equity Fund, raised just nearly $30 million of private investment from local actors to redevelop our downtown fund. I was hired in 2018 and brought on two colleagues. And what my colleagues and I realized is that this 30 million is great, but it's nowhere near what we need. We need over $100 million to revitalize our downtown. And we need it today. We don't need it tomorrow. We don't need it 10 years from now. We are losing people every year. So we need to shock the market back to life today. And what's great about opportunity zones is that, one, it leaves it up to the local actors on the ground to determine the projects that need the capital. And two, there's no government timeline. There's no funding cycle. There's no application cycle. It is really up to the investors and the shovel-ready projects. So this is what we needed to turbocharge our revitalization of downtown. And as I mentioned, there were a lot of people that have been a part of this process. The city in getting the comprehensive plan done, the private sector in raising the initial capital to get our work done. We work very closely with our Congressman Mike Kelly and our two senators and our state elected officials. We worked closely with a lot of outside groups like EIG and Sorensen, who have helped us learn from other communities. So there's been a lot of, it's 4 years in the making to get to this point of where we're deploying capital, but a big bipartisan community effort to get to this point.
That's great. Let me bring John Lettieri in here for a second, if you don't mind. John, I'm really, I think I met with you and Sean Parker, I don't know, 3 years ago or something like that about this project. I'd like to get glean into the insight that you and Sean and your group have prioritized opportunity zones in your work and what your research analysis has found on their impact. That's question one. Question two, every time I talk to people about opportunity zones, typically investors and funds, I always say, don't forget the mission. Don't forget, this is, yes, we want people to make money and we know that the tax advantages, but the mission here is not regentrifying these communities, but revitalizing these communities and helping the people who are in those communities rise out of poverty. Do not forget that mission. So I try to, lambast people to mind the mission. You guys are actually measuring that. So tell us, what do you think, shy of legislation, can be done to separate the wheat from the chaff, to separate the good opportunity funds that are doing the right thing from those that aren't? And how do we best catalyze the right behavior and make sure that these funds meet the actual mission? And so analysis, what does it show you? How do you make sure that we can put the pressure in the right direction so that it meets the mission?
Sure. And thanks, Speaker Ryan. It's great to be with you again, and great to be with my fellow panelists here. First on what we're seeing so far in the market, I think it's important to remember how early on in the process we still are. It's easy to forget that because in legislative terms, something that passed almost 3 years ago, is long in the tooth. And there's often this political timeline that says we should be able to know by now, we should be able to declare victory or failure or to have some kind of firm assessment. But when it comes to a market-based incentive like this, there's all kinds of market formation and groundwork that has to be laid before you really get to see what the potential of the policy in the real world looks like. And that starts with the regulatory piece, because investors can't move forward in confidence, can't raise capital, can't deploy capital until the rules of the road are clear. And that only just happened in December of 2019. And then they had about 3 months before the pandemic hit. So there's a newness to this in the real world, and with any new product in a financial marketplace, it takes years to really make that normal. And so we're just entering. Had it not been for the pandemic, I was saying, I think 2020 was going to be the big reveal in terms of the full scale and diversity of the potential for the market. And again, as you know, Speaker Ryan, this was always conceived as a decade plus policy, right? For a reason, because this is tackling a challenge that did not arise overnight and is not going to be solved overnight. So when you want to talk about real results, those need to be measured in decade plus increments. But we can tell a lot about the design structure and whether those those original ambitions and assumptions are proving to be correct. Opportunity zones was designed to be a very flexible, malleable incentive that could be relevant to a wide range of communities and a wide range of needs within those communities. So it's not a Keurig cup type of policy where you have one size fits all, one type of use case, and you just apply that very narrowly. There's a place for policies like that. You mentioned LIHTC earlier. LIHTC tells you in the name what it's there for. It's for low-income housing. Opportunity zones marries well with those types of policies, but it also can be used for a diversity. The ambition was for it to be used for diversity types of projects. So we should know by now whether that's proving to be true, and it is. The range of different types of community needs that are being met by opportunity zones or being supported by it, I think is much broader than any policy of this type has ever been able to accomplish. And it's, again, been able to accomplish it in a relatively short period of time in the life of the policy. So everything from basic local amenities like housing, grocery stores, health clinics, small business infrastructure, all the way on up to high technology, robotics, agribusiness, all kinds of different types of use cases that speak to that malleability and flexibility that was meant to be there. And why that matters is that the needs of a distressed community vary from community to community. They're not all the same. They don't all have the same needs and assets. And so if you want a policy to be broadly applicable, unlike many of the policies that we've tried in the past, you need something that really is a tool for local implementation, not a top-down, this is how you must use it type of policy. And that's exactly what we see in stories like Erie's. Congresswoman Sewell has, she mentioned Opportunity Alabama and what's happening there. Just the diversity of types of things you see within those communities is amazing. But the fact that a industrial city like Erie and rural Alabama are both seeing benefit from this policy in dramatically different ways, I think speaks to one of the early successes of the policy, which is that diversity and flexibility that allows it to match with the local needs. The second thing we need to see is scale. If you're talking about a national map of places, to really make a meaningful dent in the challenge that this was designed to address, you need a lot of capital. And that's also been one of the things that's hamstrung previous policy efforts, is it just didn't get to scale in getting private activity and private capital off the sidelines at the scale that was necessary to move the needle. And so even on that, while we don't have comprehensive numbers, and this speaks to why EIG has been so forceful in supporting transparency and reporting efforts and getting those both in the House and Senate on a bipartisan basis moved forward, we need better precision when it comes to the type and the amount of investment that's coming out. But just what's self-reported by fund managers puts that in the tens of billions already. White House CEA came out with a report that put it at a range of somewhere between 30 and 90 billion. I think that's a plausible range. And again, that's very early on, where the rules of the road have just been made clear, where we're in the middle of a pandemic, a lot of roadblocks to getting that capital off the sidelines. But at that scale, I think we're on track to meeting that threshold question of, can this motivate market behavior at the scale necessary to see some real wins around the country. Your second question was about how do we motivate the right type of behavior? And I think this gets to one of the unfortunate aspects of how Opportunity Zones has been implemented so far, where and this is, I think, both the fault of supporters and critics of the policy, that they place too much expectation on one tool. Just because Congress passes a law means that things will automatically start to happen, for good or for bad. Rather than, as Congressman Sewell described it, this is just another tool, and a very powerful one, in the broader toolkit. So what are the other things that are necessary to making that tool really flourish in the lives of people that have been overlooked and their communities that have been overlooked for decades? It takes a lot more than just a capital incentive to make that work. Opportunity Zones on its own is nothing. It's just a tool that's either going to be used or not used, but who implements it, who are the stakeholders at the table helping that happen, goes a long way in telling you what kind of outcomes we're going to see 10, 20 years down the road. So one aspect that I think is, there's both hopeful signs and some reasons to be frustrated. The philanthropic community has largely been absent from this conversation, where they could be playing an enormous role in backstopping the private capital because on its own, Opportunity Zones makes deals that would otherwise be not attractive much more attractive. But for the really deeply distressed areas and the really high impact things in those areas, you often need even more concessionary capital than what the private market alone can provide. This is a perfect role for philanthropy to come in and provide loss guarantees, backstops to investors that make it less risky to take what is an enormous bet. Because remember, the tax benefit for opportunity zones only comes in for an investor after 10 years of committed capital in an opportunity zone investment. That's a long time horizon for any investor. That's not normal for the marketplace. If on top of that, you're asking them to do deals themselves that are extremely risky or have very low margin, there need to be other factors that help to mitigate some of the risks that they may perceive if you really want to drive towards the highest impact stuff. I think that's totally doable. And we see examples where philanthropy has done it, but they haven't stepped up at scale. We're actually asking more of the private sector to help address struggling communities than we're asking of organizations with multi-billion-dollar endowments that are designed ostensibly to do just this very thing. So I think that kind of partnership can produce remarkable results, especially when paired with really smart local decision-making like we see in Erie. John mentioned the most important thing to me, which is there was a plan, and they are using this to implement a plan that has broad community support and engagement from, by the way, their community foundation, from a Fortune 500 employer, from a mayor. You know, everyone's involved in pulling in the same direction, and they know what that direction is. If you add opportunity zones into that mix, you're going to see amazing results. But if it's just left without any kind of strategy or any kind of intentionality, especially from those who are there pre-positioned to have that intentionality, I think we should be really modest in our expectations of this or any other tool. So I'd say the best way to get the kind of results that we all want to see out of this is for there to be a plan for a community, for the right kind of stakeholders to actually have skin in the game, not just expect that the private sector is going to show up and do everything exactly right, and for the right type of community engagement to identify where the needs and opportunities are. The last thing I'll say on that is, one thing that we see in almost every successful market for opportunity zones is there is somebody coordinating that activity on the ground. This is another way that philanthropy can help fill the gap, the information gap that is so much of a hurdle for outside investors or anyone who wants to do good in these communities. How do they know what the needs are or what the opportunities are, where to put their capital? So you have facilitators in cities like Baltimore, in cities like Norfolk, in Opportunity Alabama's case, in Birmingham, and many other places in that state, where they are playing the intermediary role that helps to bring in outside capital, attach it to high impact local projects, measure the transparency of it, make that known to the community, and get people on the same page so that these plans that may take 5, 10, 15 years under normal circumstances can accelerate quite a bit and have a real-time impact in the lives of local residents. I think there's a lot we can do short of legislation. We should do the legislation. But these types of community partnerships are much more powerful in the long run than anything Congress can mandate of the private sector. And I think there's no reason to wait to see that happen.
I think that's an excellent result. And that's what we're trying to do at the American Idea Foundation. We want to make sure that the law meets its potential. And that means various stakeholders come together in a combined effort to really use the power of this tool, which is a fantastic economic incentive, but if only deployed that way, will fall far short of its mandate and its promise. One of those funds that I think really mines the mission of opportunity is Catalysts. So Patrick, I had the pleasure of being in Salt Lake last week, meeting with you guys about how you're trying to measure the mission, what it is you're doing, the analytics and the data you're employing, so that you really are making an impact in the way the law was intended to make. So walk us through a little bit. Don't reveal proprietary stuff if you have that, but walk us through your methodology, why you chose to, why Sorensen and Catalyst chose to do this, and how you are attacking this with an eye toward the actual fulfillment of its mission, in addition to just the tax benefit itself.
Well, it's terrific to be here with everybody. And honestly, it's so refreshing to just hear very detailed about what other people are doing. You know, in the investment world, you tend to get your head down and really focus on the project and the mission, the thing that's right in front of you. So to kind of level up and see what's going on in Erie, and then also to get the broader view of what's going on with EIG, and then sincerely to hear the bipartisan support and that what you're pushing. And with having Congressman Sewell here, and to hear that that cover fire for keeping this something that is bipartisan, it's been a big hope of mine and Jim's. That when I show up in these small towns around the country, nobody asks your partisan affiliation. They're interested in how many jobs, how much investment, and what you can do to help people. And so I think these sort of projects can bring people together in unique ways. So I appreciate this, and I thank you for organizing us. Just starting for a moment with Catalyst, Jim Sorensen and I started this really from an entrepreneur's perspective. He's a well-known entrepreneur based in Salt Lake. I'm also an entrepreneur. Primarily I was in San Francisco. I'm now relocated to Austin. But what we both know is that talent is broadly spread across this country. Jim's had two big successes in Salt Lake. I've done 4 companies, 2 in San Francisco and 2 outside, 1 in Portland, Maine, where we got the business up to 600 people and made a very big impact there, and another in Baltimore, Maryland, which is still going. We've raised $60 million, recently announced $25 million Series B, just showing that there are so many places around this country when talented people are given the opportunity through capital investment and the infrastructure required to be successful, the potential is unlimited. So with that kind of framework, that's when we started Catalyst. We said, what is the biggest challenge? Investment capital is concentrated in a very narrow part of the world, like 3 states, California and Washington and Boston, California, Massachusetts, and New York, about 80% of the venture dollars. And then that money gets recycled locally. And when John Letieri here approached me with the Opportunity Zone concept, I thought, this is amazing. You know, I've invested in 47 companies, 30 of them outside of Silicon Valley. And my question is always, how do I get the next funding dollar to Baltimore, to Salt Lake, to Austin, to Minneapolis, to Pittsburgh? And if there was this incentive to give that little extra look to investors who've put capital to work and now have been successful, then that incentive can actually unlock a lot of talent. And so that's how Jim and I came to Catalyst. Now, we're both entrepreneurs, so we know that you get what you measure. This is something that when you came out to Salt Lake, I think really resonated with your mind as well, is that you can measure financial returns. Okay, we're going to invest in this. It's going to, over this many years, we're going to put these dollars to work. It's going to give this return. And at the end, you're going to have $1 return. And we can kind of use a lot of diligence to do that. But what about the impact return? Now, if you just hope it's going to happen, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. But we, as entrepreneurial mindset, we built our own scorecard. Literally, we have a scorecard that has, commitment by the developer, community engagement, housing affordability, inclusion, access to services, economic development, and sustainability as measurable inputs to any project there we're going to invest in. So our core belief is that you can get market rate returns with measurable impact. And putting those two together is the hurdle that we use to decide on where to deploy our capital.
And so, to be clear, that's a hurdle that's not just an economic database hurdle. That is a hurdle on community impact, correct?
That's right, exactly. That's exactly right. So when we start with the project, we're talking to a developer who has a history of engaging in the community. Number one is, have you talked to the community about what they need? Why is this project important? And what are you doing measurably to ensure that you're going to deliver to the community what you're promising? And when we show them a scorecard and say, this is how we're going to measure this project, it's amazing how it aligns everybody's interests. If people are interested in the impact, they're going to say, I love measurement. And this is what Congressman Sewell was talking about for measurement and updating the legislation. John Letieri, it's 2 Johns, we've talked a lot about this. We welcome measurement and reporting because we're already, Speaker Ryan, like you said, funds like ours, we are already doing this. We are so committed to the impact, and we also have this core belief. And I just want to share this because I'm a very market-driven impact investor, is that the market return with impact will attract more non-incentivized capital. The point isn't just to have the Opportunity Zone capital coming in. I expect a 10x follow-on with more capital coming in behind this to engage these communities and to really bring up the wealth factors. So like this is a catalyst, that's what we call it, catalyst, a catalyst to bring more investment behind it. So the market rate return is going to attract more return. And then our commitment to impact, and over a 10-year period, we have the advantage of having a long-term view. So when we're looking at a project, we say, you know what? In a 10-year view, having affordable housing is incredibly powerful to the overall return. If you have a health center And public transportation, wow, that's really powerful. If you have local training that is actually engaging the community and keeping people there, over a 10 or 12-year period, that investment is going to be more valuable. So there's that market return tying into the forward thinking. So we're not on a 3 or 4 year development term where we're going to refi and send everybody's capital back. We actually, for an IRR perspective, we have to think, what investments can we make in the 3 to 4 year period, measure them, knowing that on a 10 to 12 year period, we're going to be able to get that return. And that's kind of where the financial hurdle rate and the impact hurdle rate match together. And then very specifically, Speaker Ryan, to really nail your answer, it's not really proprietary to us. We love to share it and talk about it, but we have a scorecard. And not every project has to score economic development versus community or versus housing. They can be kind of different, but they have to score high enough to actually hit our hurdle. So and if you don't measure it, you don't get the outcome. And so that's our commitment. I'd love to talk some more about it, get specific projects, but enjoying the conversation.
Yeah, so we at the American Idea Foundation, we're knowing that we didn't get the law written exactly as we wanted to because of these rules I mentioned earlier. We're trying to figure out what is exactly the right way to measure and have a scorecard so that participating funds mind the mission. And that is one of the things that we're trying to do as just sort of a player that is only interested in nothing more than the success of this idea and the policy. So we're looking at doing that ourselves. And so we're looking for feedback from any number of people who are in this space. How do we measure? How do we encourage? How do we influence? And how do we make sure that the best funds, which ones are attracting capital, are deploying capital, are the ones that mind the community mission in addition to the economic mission? I'm going to go to the chat function now, excuse me, the Q&A function now. They told me don't use the chat function. And a couple quick ones I want to get. So from anonymous attendee for John Persinger, opportunity zones at their core are about helping people who live in these communities. Can you talk through what this project means for people living in Erie and what the reception has been on the ground? Is this resonating locally? That's a really important question because a lot of folks locally don't even know why this is happening or where this come from. Who are these people with these funds? So what's the on the ground feeling that you're experiencing there? And do they really know this is coming from the catalyst of opportunity zones?
So we at the Erie Downtown Development Corporation are working in one of the poorest zip codes in America. The median income in our area right here is $10,631. So as you can imagine, there are individuals here who live a different lifestyle than every experience that you and I and probably everyone else who's participating in this webinar are experiencing. I don't think they are understanding that it's coming from opportunity zones. For their perspective, they want cautiously optimistic about the changes that are to come. To give you two concrete examples, one, part of our plan, we acquired and tore down a McDonald's. I know you were a former McDonald's employee. McDonald's in downtown Erie it was crime ridden. You would walk in there would be people who were overdosing. It was a problem right around people who are trying to live down here. So that was a problem we had to get rid of. The second, the individuals who are living down here don't have a stable supply of fresh, healthy foods. We are in a USDA designated food desert. Their options are to go to the Dollar General that's a few blocks away, or to go to a corner store and get some boxed items. They don't have a fresh food grocery store down here. And so that is one of the things that we are going to bring to downtown thanks to Opportunity Zones. We have 5 historic properties on a block that overlooks our main park in downtown. These properties are about a total of 100,000 square feet. 80,000 have been vacant for decades. They're blighted now. One used to house a former biker bar. And what we are doing is turning that into a culinary arts district. There's going to be a fully operating grocery store. There's going to be a food hall with 9 new businesses. And there's going to be a culinary incubator. So the individuals who live in this community are not only going to have access to a fresh supply of healthy food, they're also going to be able to tap into the jobs that are going to be created down here. We're projecting with our partners over 400 jobs will be created across 3 blocks, not just this block, but the other 2 that we're working on. And they'll also have the opportunity to utilize our culinary incubators. So they don't have to expend huge sums of money on culinary equipment if they have an idea for a business that they want to start or scale and expand. That's just one way of how we are working right in the neighborhood to address the neighborhood needs at the same time that we are revitalizing buildings, developing a diverse, vibrant downtown, and utilizing Opportunity Zone funds to do so.
Great. Let me ask another one from Carl. This is more of a technical one, so for either Patrick and John, I think. How is business risk assessed relative to the operations of the entities that pay the rent to support the real estate investment? Are Opportunity Zones specific for real estate investment to drive other economic benefits? Any of you guys care to answer that one?
I'll take a first crack at the question, and it's a really excellent question because, you know, if you use the same kind of capital stack to do projects, you're going to kind of face the same financial hurdle and why these things aren't already happening. Right. The point of the program is to create new opportunities. And so the way we look at it is with the incentive, we're able to use a different leverage ratio, right? So instead of doing like a construction refi out and taking the debt to, you know, 75 or 80%, where you add a lot of financial risk, and on a 10-year period or 12-year period, more likely, we know we're going to have business cycles. And so if you highly lever these projects, you are going to face struggles. So what we do is we say, okay, say it's 65%. So we would significantly lower the financial risk, which then with the incentive on a net basis, you're kind of sharing that incentive with lowering the risk of the project, which then makes more projects viable, because business cycle is the biggest risk in these kind of, for us, looking at these mid-sized markets, right? Because they tend to hit these mid-sized markets harder than other markets. The other one is something I'd asked John to talk about, is bringing in kind of the non-dilutive capital.
Right.
So this is kind of that capital stack of kind of the foundation equity. When we really, really want to see like a health program or some training, as John Pershing was talking about, that is sometimes hard to pencil on a dollar for investment project. But if we can bring in some non-dilutive to the financial return investment into the stack, then that allows us to maintain the return profile and get more projects done with the impact that we're looking to. And we think, circling back, when we put the impact right next to the financial return, it allows us to say, if we really, really want this impact, what's keeping us from it to hit that financial return? So those are the ways we're looking at it.
John?
I think Patrick said it well. I don't have much to add there, except just that underscores that this is not just about public-private partnership. It really is public-private philanthropic when it comes to some of the most impactful deals, and where you need to get in terms of return profile to get the kind of investment interest that you need for those supremely high impact and most challenging deals to execute.
So I've got another. Oh.
I was going to say, to give you a concrete example from Erie, thanks to the folks at EIG, we were introduced to Arcturus Impact Investors out of Boston, and they are committing $40 million to Erie's Opportunity Zone projects. They would help convince them to come to Erie is that there is Erie Insurance going to be investing in their funds, which is a Fortune 400 company, our major employer here in Erie. And the Erie Community Foundation is also putting up money to serve as a backstop for these investments. So that's just kind of a concrete example of how it's public-private, philanthropic coming together to make these deals happen.
So that's a good dovetail to this next question from Sharon. I'm very new to Opportunity Zone world. Previously heard of it and thought it was a main vehicle to draw on foreign investment, which is not really the deal. And any advice on how to find projects and how to invest? So I think that's really EIG's sweet spot, if I'm not mistaken. So if you're someone who wants to invest in opportunity funds, where do you go? And then I'm just going to take another person's question, Matthews, which is, what is the first step for a local government to tap into the Opportunity Zone incentive? So I think we all know the answer to those, but I think maybe EIG, because is there a website someone could go to get the answer to these kinds of questions? Lettieri, since there's two Johns, I'll go by last name. What would you say?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There's not a single source to find eligible deals. There are, if you do just the basic keyword search, Googling, you'll come across a number of websites that have Opportunity Zones directories of eligible projects. Some are state or locally based, where they've made transparent, here is our zones, here are some deals that are eligible within those zones, here's how to get in touch with with the folks who are behind those investment projects. You can go to our website, eig.org. There's a activity map that we've compiled. It's not, nothing can be comprehensive in this world, but it is indicative of the diversity of things happening around the country. So if you're new to this world, that's a good place to start to get a flavor for what kind of things are happening around the country and the types of people you might want to pursue to speak with, to get involved. What was the second question, Speaker?
Well, I can answer real quick. The question is, what's the first step for local government to tap into the incentive? Basically, your state, your governor in your state would have submitted the census tract data, the application list to the Treasury Department. They have already done that. So you now already have the census tracts in your state that are designated opportunity zones. So go to your state to find out which are those in your local community.
I would just add, I think a lot of people hear this and they think about it in New Markets tax credit terms, where there's a award being given. There's no tax credit being given from a government intermediary. This is all private capital being induced to come to the community. So it's important for people to understand this is really, it's similar in intent to other programs, but there's not a fixed or finite amount of capital that's being awarded through the policy. And that's one of the things that makes it so different.
Yeah, and then I got one from Brian here. How do we move forward in a time of political division when it comes to bipartisan solutions to poverty? I'll take a crack at this one. It's what Terry Sewell said. By the way, I've always been a big fan of Terry Sewell. I think she's one of the up-and-comers in her party in Congress. And one of the reasons, because she has so much respect from all sides of the aisle, because she's just a solutions-oriented person. And so I think you'll have solutions-oriented policymakers from both parties in Congress who are going to work to make sure that this idea survives and prevails, because it really does hold a lot of promise. The challenge in anything like this, as I learned, is it does take time for results to materialize. I think the panelists have just shown, you're deploying capital, you're building allegiances, you're trying to incorporate the philanthropic sector, the local government, and the capital, and that's going to take a while to develop. So the key is, in the short term, can you make sure that the idea is preserved, and that no matter who is running what in government, that these ideas are not brought backwards but elevated forward. I think that's frankly what a lot of us can help do, whether it's EIG, the American Idea Foundation, people at Catalyst, and then great showpieces like Erie. So we believe that this is an enormous tool that will bring a real game changer to our efforts at fighting poverty. And I would say, thanks to what we've learned in economics, thanks to new data tools that we have in measuring things, we can really demonstrate that this is game-changing policy that helps bring a real movement into poor communities. The challenge that people like me as policymakers, and I spent the prior 20 years in Congress, was we would just do small things. We would do nice ideas, but little fits and starts, and not really flooding the zone where you had real multi-generational poverty. We would never surge a big array of solutions into an area. And so you'd see little one-offs, maybe a nice recidivism program here, or maybe a food pantry here, but never the kind of big surging solutions that are comprehensive. That's what we think Opportunity Zones does. And just to be clear, some people who are, I can see in the Q&A, there's a lot of people who are brand new to this concept. The fundamental tax benefit is you can like-kind, I speak like a Ways and Means guy. You can take a capital gain, roll it into an opportunity fund, meaning like farmers do when they buy land, a like-kind exchange, we call it. You can not pay taxes on your capital gain, roll it into an opportunity fund. And if you park your money in the fund working in these poor communities for at least 10 years, then you do not have a capital gain liability. And to Patrick's point, what that does is it lowers the hurdle rate that an investment has to achieve to be successful. So you're willing to take more risk putting your money at work in places that have not had investment, in places that have not proven to be successful investments. So you're making it easier for that money to go there to make a huge difference by improving the after-tax rate of return on capital. Now these are all technical terms. You're basically saying, put your money in poor communities, and because of these tax changes, it's going to incentivize you to get a regular rate of return. So instead of putting it in stock or a bond or something that's proven to work, try this, and we'll make it easier for you to do this, and we'll lower the risk profile. We've long believed that this is one of the key catalysts to fighting poverty effectively. And so now that we've gotten, I would say, the first generation of reforms, meaning the law written, we're on to the second generation, which is executing the law. And given that the law didn't write exactly how we wanted it, we wanted transparency, we wanted accountability, we wanted what Terry Sewell is trying to do in the philanthropy sector, in the private sector, we can deploy those reforms right now. And so that's why EIG and others and AIF, American Idea Foundation, are trying to make sure that we have good measuring sticks out there so that people who are investing in opportunity funds are not just using this as a tax advantage tool, they're using this as a successful poverty fighting tool. And the tax advantage draws the capital in so that we can have comprehensive efforts like you see on display in Erie, really making a permanent difference, breaking the cycle of poverty, snapping multi-generational poverty, and truly helping bring the promise of this country to everybody and bring in opportunity to people who have just not seen it before. So that is generally, I'm watching my clock here, that is generally what we're trying to do. I know that our hour is up, so I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Terry, who had to get off for her leadership. She's doing it with a guy from Wisconsin I know real well, Ron Kind, along with Mike Kelly. These are good Ways and Means members. So I want to thank John Pershinger, Patrick McKenna, and John Lettieri. Check out their websites, check out what they do, and thank you for doing what you do. Of all the things that I have seen happen in public policy, this is one of the ones that truly has a chance of making a major difference in the lives of the people who really need help in this country. So thanks for participating in this, and I look forward to future conversations with you guys. Thanks much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being us.
Go Packers.